Hello, welcome to Music Appreciation. Today I'm going to talk about the waltz. The waltz is a dance in 3/4 time, which means 3 beats a measure, and it's based on a dance that was very popular in Europe. When we think of a waltz, we think of the bass repeating the low notes on the first beat and the chords playing on 2 and 3. 1, 2. Well, the Viennese, who made the waltz especially popular in the 1800s, would put a little push towards the second beat and delay the third. So the person who was leading the dance, normally the man, would be able to swing around the dance partner. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the word waltz actually comes from to swirl or to swing around in German. Now, Johann Strauss became one of the most popular and famous internationally waltz composers, but I'm going to review waltzes by several composers that we already know, and we'll of course hear some Johann Strauss. Now, some of the origins of the waltz dance in Europe were actually considered to be very questionable, according to many. And as it rose in popularity, there was a lot of resistance to it because it was considered to be not only a folk dance from lower origins, but it was considered to be somewhat lascivious or questionable morally because it presented publicly dance partners very close to each other with a hand around the waist and faces pressed together and hands held tight, and also involved a lot of swinging around, so that means the bodies were very close. These dances were, in 3/4 time, were popular in different countries. In Vienna and around the countryside of Austria, and in German-speaking countries, there was a dance called the Landler, which Schubert actually used for several of his compositions for piano. The Landler dance was considered to be influential upon the waltz dance. Also, Chopin and his mazurkas, he made the mazurka famous, but it was a Polish folk dance as well. And that also had a 3/4 rhythm. For example, his mazurka in A minor. So the left hand gives you 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So when the dance became popular in Vienna and other countries, it replaced something that was very popular with the nobility, which was the minuet. Remember the minuet from that was attributed to J.S. Bach, which is actually by Christian Petzold. That's an abbreviated version, but the minuet was a dance in 3/4, which was presented in court. And in the 1700s, it was said that many nobility would actually have the minuet courtly dances where there was a safe distance between dance partners, and then afterwards they would go to their staff parties, their servant parties, where they were actually really having fun and waltzing. So the dance that you're probably most familiar with, other than the Carnival of Venice, is the Danube Waves. And I will give you some samples of some well-known waltzes and then go back in time to some not as well-known waltzes. So, one of them that will surprise you a lot is actually a waltz called Over the Waves. This one was written by a Mexican indigenous composer named Juventino Rosas. And a lot of people think that Johann Strauss wrote it. And it became popular in Europe in the Viennese orchestra, a waltz orchestra, and is still played in Mexico quite often. Yet even some of the locals don't know that Rosas wrote this piece. Now this waltz, like many others, has actually an introduction, which I did not play. It is a call to dance, often. It's slow and out of tempo. As if to say, wake up everyone, stop talking, time to dance. Then you have the A section dance, which we just heard. The B section, and then it returns to the A. But most waltzes actually have several sections, as if they were several waltzes actually strung together to make one larger dance piece. Sometimes they change tempo, and of course sometimes they change key, like this. Change key with not really a musical purpose, but more or less to keep the excitement up, to create a flow, and to either maintain or change the energy of the dance. Now, you'll recognize, of course, some of the dances by both Waldteufel, Johann Strauss, and Franz Lehár. One is actually called Vienna Life. Because in Vienna, everyone was wild about the waltz. Change. Etc. There are many more sections to that one, of course. Our ubiquitous and maybe overplayed waltz is probably the most famous of all. I need not even tell you the title. but it is named after a river that flows from Vienna through Budapest. Now, the composer who made the waltz a popular piece for piano solo was Chopin. He wasn't the first to do it, but his waltzes are probably some of the best known. Frédéric Chopin wrote several waltzes though that really don't sound like they could even be dance pieces. They just imply the different moods of the dance, and of course they're always in 3/4 time. This one is a Grand Valse Brillante, Opus 34, number 2, composed in 1831, when the waltz was incredibly popular in Europe. Chopin's waltz is in A minor, and it starts with a lento or very slow opening. And it is not meant to be danced to. It is a performance piece based on the dance. Returns to the original key of A minor and ends in a dramatic way, but it's a performance piece. And this wonderful waltz, something that many of us know, is unlike one of his other most famous waltzes, which is subtitled or given the name the Minute Waltz. Now, that wasn't a name that Chopin gave his waltz, but because it had such fast figures and scales, it was suggested that that piece could be played in a minute. Now, I won't dare to do that, but imagine dancing to this. One would really run out of breath. waltzes of Chopin, but I'm going to go on to some other romantic composers who wrote several waltzes. One of the best known sets of waltzes is by Johannes Brahms. He lived a little later than Chopin. He lived almost until 1900, died in 1897. And he has waltzes that are arranged as solo pieces for piano and also for piano duet. And they've also been arranged for orchestra. One of the things you'll note about his waltzes is that the accompaniments have thicker chords and his harmonies are quite rich. And though it has a beautiful melody, there's a little bit more emphasis on sonority. And the waltz in A flat is sometimes considered to be a lullaby. And it is one of his most beautiful and popular pieces. Now, another well-known waltz, one of my favorites, is a piece by the Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg. His works were popular in the Romantic era as part of a nationalist movement in music. Tchaikovsky, for example, Edvard Grieg, Chopin, Franz Liszt, and several others came from other countries and wrote music with the influence of folk song and dance rhythms. This was a large movement in the Romantic era in the 1800s, inspired by the many revolutions that had occurred, upholding nationalist ideas and folkloric traditions in the culture before they disappeared completely. So in music and in stories, in folk tales and fairy tales, we can find a lot of these stories. And so composers like Grieg tried to preserve it. This is his Waltz, Opus 12, number 2. waltz that is quite beautiful and short is by the composer Enrique Granados, a Spanish composer of the late Romantic era who lived into the 20th century. This is very poetic and very melodic and lyrical, and he takes this composition to a sort of new creative level by varying the textures, and there's more counterpoint and of course grace notes and melodic ideas that are reminiscent of Spanish music. And many modern composers wrote waltzes, Shostakovich and Prokofiev, and we have a selection from some later waltzes for you, maybe in our next talk. But I'm going to finish up with a nice surprise by our wonderful ragtime composer, the great Scott Joplin, American composer. And he wrote several waltzes, actually. Stancing was something that he was trying to inspire, both in the ragtime and the stomps. And in this waltz, called Bethina, it's a very elegant piece, which he calls a concert waltz. Scott Joplin. Bethina, concert waltz. Thank you so much for listening. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.